Hello, and welcome to your Pointers for Parents podcast, where we support parents with anxiety as it relates to teens transitioning out of the home after high school, whether we're heading off to the college campus, the military base, or simply residential interdependence. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Lloyd, and on today's episode, we will talk with a mother herself about the teen brain. Our today's guest is Dr. Hayley Nelson, and let me tell you just a little bit about her. She is a neuroscientist, tenured psychology professor and international speaker, and founder of the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience, where she is passionate about making neuroscience approachable. I love that. She earned her PhD in psychological and brain sciences from the Johns Hopkins University and has over 20 years of teaching experience with students from diverse backgrounds. You know, we like the diverse backgrounds. She also has served peer-reviewed research, publications and previous research and faculty appointments with the National Institute of Health at the Johns Hopkins University and the University of Pennsylvania. By creating certification programs with the Academy and Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience, Dr. Hayley combined her knowledge of the human brain, the human mind health with her passion for education, teaching, and consulting to truly making neuroscience accessible and approachable, which we so appreciate that. She loves working with life coaches, wellness professionals, therapists, and counselors who are ready to stand apart and show up as true leaders in their field. And so I know that she will talk a little bit about that certification program a little later in the program, and I'm so excited about that. So listen, let's lean in, let's listen, and let's learn as we hear from Dr. Hayley. So thank you so much, Dr. Hayley, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Lloyd. It's great to be here, and I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Me as well. Oh, I so appreciate you. So listen, let's just go ahead and jump in. Tell us about the teenage brain and how we as parents can help to develop that in a positive way. Because at some point, of course, our teenagers are transitioning out of the home, which many are transitioning out this upcoming fall, and we'd like to pour into our teens. So help us with that, please.
Absolutely. And it's funny, the teenage brain, so if you think about the three facets of your life, or really four, you have infancy and childhood, right? And your brain is rapidly growing and you're learning so much. And then we have adulthood, right? But then there's that weird space in between, that teenage brain where it's flooded with hormones and all of these new questions start arising that you never thought about before. Your moral values, your ethical standards, all of these things that as a child, you never really considered. And as an adult, they're pretty formalized. So during this transition period as a teenager, you're questioning all of these things. And as a result, your brain is also rapidly changing and developing. And then, of course, you have your older years as well, where that's also a different brain. But today we're really focusing in on that teenage brain. And I always love to remind people, whether they're my students at my college or people who I'm consulting with, or even just friends who say, why is my child doing this? You know, it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, well, you're using this adult brain that has been more formalized to try to explain what's happening in your child's brain that is still trying to figure everything out and is still rapidly growing and developing. And when we're looking at the teenage brain, one of the main differences between the child brain and an adult brain, the thing that changes the most during that adolescent period is our prefrontal cortex. So this is the front part of our brain. This helps us with impulse control. It helps us with executive functioning, our short-term memory and, working memory and staying on task and staying focused and making rational decisions that are going to make sense and thinking about our future, right? So if you think back to some of the stupid decisions that you made or I made as a teenager, sometimes I look back and I say, who was that person? What was I thinking, right? And a lot of it is because I wasn't thinking. I wasn't using my prefrontal cortex because it wasn't fully functional yet. And so if that area of our brain isn't fully formed and functional until it really doesn't really finish developing and maturing until your mid to late 20s. So all of these decisions, if you're not able to use that executive functioning and executive control to make these decisions for future planning and things, you have to use the areas of your brain that are fully developed and that are well established and well developed in infancy and childhood, that's how you've been making these decisions throughout your entire life, right? And so things that feel good, those are the things that you're going to gravitate to, things that give you that instant gratification, because that has served you well and it's kept you alive and healthy and fruitful, and it's guided your decisions up until this point. So you always fall back on that because that's what's really running the show. And this is our emotional center of our brain, really strengthened by areas like the amygdala, for example, that are really guiding our behaviors. And then when you throw in hormones and things that you never really noticed before, right? Whether it's people or ideas or literature or things and ideas that, oh, wait a second, I never knew Sally from across the street had, looked like that. It's like, whoa, wait a second, this is a whole new person that I'm noticing for the first time. And, now those are the things that are going to drive you to make those decisions, to motivate you. And so a lot of those irrational decisions are not your child's fault. They're working with a brain that's not fully developed yet. And so we as parents and educators really need to first understand that some of those stupid decisions that they're making, they're doing the best that they can. They're not looking at it as a stupid choice. It's just a choice. They're not thinking about the future necessarily. And of course, I'm speaking in averages. There's definitely some children and adolescents who are very mature for their age. And then there's adults who you would think are still 12 years old making decisions that way. So I'm talking in averages here. But it's something that we first have to have that grace and that understanding that how we're going to then speak with them about some of their choices and decisions. We really need to look at it through a lens of somewhere in between. We're adults, but we can't talk to them as equals yet because we're using different structures. They're different brains. And so how we communicate and teach and inform also needs to be through that lens of what's going to make the most sense and how can we best support them.
I love that, what you just mentioned. And I look at you and I hear this wisdom as it relates to the teenage brain. And then also knowing that you're a professor and teaching and you see it all the time. And so
do I ever?
And so when choices are made by these students, whether they're in the classroom or just out of the classroom and on the campus, like you can understand, like in an in-depth way, why these decisions are made. And because that brain is undeveloped and they're operating on what they're accustomed to in the past.
Absolutely. And then especially if you throw things like trauma into the mix or drug use, just stress in general. I mean, we all experience stress, but the hormones that are released during stress can be really impactful on these developing brains, especially. And, those are some things that a lot of time administrators and other faculty members in different departments might not necessarily take into consideration. And so it's definitely something that we have to be aware of. And I usually approach my students just assuming that everybody has had trauma in their life. Right. And so if I approach everybody on this same playing field, that something I say or do or an assignment is potentially going to be triggering for them. Now, granted, I'm in a psychology department, right? So a lot of the topics and conversations we have could very well be quite triggering. It wouldn't be surprising that some people might be triggered by some of the conversations that we have. But, whereas math or something like that might not be as as emotionally charged. However, if I just assume that everybody has that coming in with that, just background and that grace to give them that extra patience has been quite helpful. And, just meeting people where they're at, right? And I'm currently at a community college, so I have students who are dual enrolled high school students. So they are, anywhere from 15 years old. And then I have adult learners who are retired and just want to come back and learn about the brain or learn about psychology and just for fun. And they're auditing the class, but they're sitting in the same classroom together. So I have 65, 70-year-olds in the classroom with 15-year-olds. And having these conversations and the way that I present the material can be quite challenging because at other institutions, it was very homogenous who I was teaching to. And now I have this very wide gamut of people with different life experiences, different educational goals, different backgrounds. It's been very eye-opening for me. And I think it's made me not only a better teacher, but a better mother and a better friend as well.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And even as you're talking, I'm thinking about even myself as a parent. And a lot of times, we spend time raising our teens and attempting to control their behavior when in essence, do we really think about us making sure that we're controlling our own behaviors? Because when you bring up that trauma, a lot of the trauma, depending on a parent's background, and that can be we may have to invite you back because this may be a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Because we can, as parents, we can bring some of that trauma from our background and upbringing and all of that. And so they're coming then on the college campus with some of them undeveloped, some of us developed, yet in different ways. And so that can bring a lot. So so let's just go ahead and jump into just talking about how can we strengthen? Surely there's some ways we can strengthen the brain. We can help our teens, whether they've transitioned out of the home already or whether they're already on the college campus. I'm curious to know, we hear about things such as brain foods and we hear about maybe brain exercises. So what actions can be taken to help strengthen and even improve the brain? Anything at all, Dr. Hayley?
Absolutely. So one thing that I want to speak about, and it's also related to what you just mentioned, is this distinction between our brain and our mind, right? So the brain is the physical structure, and we absolutely can eat foods that are going to help with the neuroplasticity and, the supplements and things like that, drinking water, all of these great things that I can absolutely go through a list of certain, brain boosting foods and supplements. But we also want to strengthen our mind. Right. So that's not necessarily something we're putting in our mouth. That's something that we can do for free, how we speak to ourselves, how we're analyzing the world around us and all of the things that we encounter on a day-to-day life. And if there's somebody listening here who might have younger children who might not be quite yet at that, they're going into their own world and life, and you just have to kind of sit back and hope and pray that you gave them everything that you could. These are some really great tools and strategies to really strengthen your mind as well. And so I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I even start with some of these positive affirmations now and having them repeat these things, because the way that the brain works through neuroplasticity, and that might be a new term for some people, but the way that the brain grows is through experience and through things that we repeat, right? So experiences from infancy all the way through adulthood, the more you do them, the stronger those connections become. And that's because our brain is an information processing machine, just like a computer, and you want to automate and make things faster. Right. And so that you don't have to constantly, reboot the computer and upload and download and get all these updates and everything. You just you want to turn your computer on and have it just work. You want it to be as simple and streamlined as possible. And so the brain is really the same way. So the more we repeat these actions and these thoughts, the stronger those connections become. So if you want to have an adult eventually who's a contributing member to society and happy and healthy, right? These are the things that we need to start feeding it at an early age and empower them to continue to want to do those on their own without you nagging at them and telling them to do these things, right? So gratitude is a great one. Just practicing gratitude journaling. It seems like just such a simple, silly practice that doesn't take that much time. But boy, oh boy, it really does show changing the connections within your brain to start noticing things from a more optimistic standpoint instead of constantly focusing on the negative, more pessimistic outlook. And this can really save thousands of dollars of therapy down the road, right? But a lot of heartache and turmoil, especially as they transition into this college setting where they're going to.
You're listening to Your Pointers for Parents podcast, where we support parents with anxiety as it relates to teens transitioning out of the home after high school. To get additional tips tossed and or gems dropped, subscribe to our weekly emails by clicking on the link below. Now back to Your Pointers for Parents podcast.
Basically be expected to be adults, right? Even though they have this not fully formed brain as a college instructor, I expect them to show up on time, to know how to time manage, to get dressed, to feed themselves properly, to do their laundry, to brush their hair, all of these things that sometimes as parents, it's hard for us to not constantly nag and remind them to do these things. But as soon as they get in the college campus, they are treated as adults. And so we have to give them these tools before they leave so that it can become automated so that they constantly do these things. So they become habits. The brain is changing to help them with this mindset, as well as a lot of these brain health techniques and exercises and practices that we can do. But the brain is one of those organs that the more you use it, the more, if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, basically. And so you want to strengthen this cognitive functioning, this autonomy to be able to make their own decisions. And that can be really, really challenging for parents to sit back and hold your tongue and knowing that they're making the wrong choice or the wrong decision, but you just have to let them experience it so they can get that emotional reaction so that they know they can learn from their mistakes and not do it again. And they can experience it firsthand instead of being told what to do before they make that error, right? So it can be very, very challenging to kind of sit back and watch your child kind of fumble through these things, but they have to be able to do these tasks themselves. And that's what's going to really help their mind. And then for brain, we can, if you want to go off on what I was just talking about, we can take a minute there, or I can give some quick supplements and foods that, you want to try to encourage as well.
Well, I'd like to share that, I want to jump in and say that when I was in undergrad, like years ago, right, I didn't remember receiving any calls from professors saying, okay, wake up and get to class. So
right.
I'm thinking that that's still today, that you all are just not going to do that at all. I am all over that. And then we can talk a little bit about the certification if you want to, just Absolutely. A little later before we wrap up. But I am all over those affirmations you just mentioned, because I know that speaking them, what it does is it gets down into the subconscious. And the subconscious does not make decisions. It only does what it hears. So that behavior will follow what is coming out of our mouths. I'm telling you it, and you will begin to act as that what you say. So I'm all over that. So good for you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Good. I'd like to chat just a little bit now, but most definitely I want the listeners to hear about that certification program. But I'd like to chat about now the social choices, because when they leave our home, they're on the outside of our door. They're in a place that's unfamiliar. They're meeting people who are unfamiliar. They're being asked to complete tasks in the classroom that may be unfamiliar on a different level. So I'd like to talk about those social choices, please. And so
Absolutely.
Okay. And so my question is, because we're concerned because we know the child that we birthed, we know who's leaving out of our front door, and then we know that things on a college campus is at a higher level. So tell me, please, in making the social choices and our teens being able to make those, how can the decision-making part of the brain, and I know you mentioned the foods and all of that, how can that be nourished in addition to the foods and the affirmations and all of that? Are there any additional ways?
I think getting back to that point of just letting them figure it out, letting them fail, is huge, because when they fail, they learn how resilient they are. Right. And I think that that's a huge thing. We, even as adults, you have a bad day, or you get fired from your job, or whatever happens. And a lot of times that negative self-talk can get in our head, and it can ruin not only our day, but ruin our year, ruin, the energy and the everything around us, and can affect other people. But we are very resilient. We underestimate how much we can overcome as humans. And allowing our children to fail and to make poor decisions sometimes, and then to see how to get themselves out of those situations is far more important than teaching them how to succeed. And I think that that is something that, I'm a mother of younger children, and, in sports and events, and it's all about getting that first place, or first, second, third. That's who gets the ribbons. But you know what? Sometimes if you look at the kids who are placing last, my son, for example, he's swimming now, and he said, "Mom, I just don't want to come in last. That's it. I don't need to be first place. I just don't want to be the last one, the slowest one." And he's not. He's a very good swimmer, but it's that mindset of, I don't need to be perfect. And then learning how to overcome and showing that improvement and that growth, and say, "Hey, you came in fourth place, but look at how much time you just dropped. You should be really proud of that accomplishment." And, switching your mindset away from the perfection, and understanding that other people come from different backgrounds and have different opinions, because when they're thrown into this college campus, they're going to be meeting people from all walks of life. And you might have done a very good job keeping them in a bubble and keeping them safe and protected while they were under your roof, right? But now they're going to be meeting people who had parents that were vastly different from you. And maybe they even start dating somebody like that, and you don't like their parents, or, all of these other things can start happening. But giving them this idea that everybody has different backgrounds and different philosophies, and empowering them to make their own decisions about who they are, who they want to be. And as their brain changes, it's going to start solidifying. So who they are as a teenager probably isn't necessarily going to be who they are as adults, right? I mean, look back on our lives, that some of the decisions that I made, even throughout college and shortly after college, I wouldn't put myself in situations and do some of the things that I did and make some of the choices that I did, even in, after college, even when I was in graduate school. But it was essential for me to be able to have some of those failures and to have some of those things, so that I could see how resilient, how strong, and how powerful I am as an individual, so that now when life throws all of the negativity and all these horrible things at me, I know that I can overcome them. And I think that that's really important, that we instill this at a young age, but definitely empower our teens, especially for the first time when they leave the house. But have them know that there is that safe place to go home to, and this person who will listen to them with unconditional love and just hear them. But then also be able to provide them that support and say, I might not be the best person to talk to about this, but here are some resources. Here are some people on campus you can talk to that are right next door. Or here's a couple phone numbers or websites that you might want to check out to find people to help you answer and to get through some of these tough decisions that you're facing. A lot of times kids don't want to talk to their parents about it because they don't want to disappoint them, right? And so finding that trusted resource and that person that they can choose to go speak with, I think is really important in fostering those more social decisions and empowering them to make those decisions. Now, when they're also on campus, they're probably going to be on a meal plan and not make the best choices on some of their foods that they're going to eat. So, try to encourage them to have that well-balanced meal, lots of green leafy vegetables. If they can get any fish in their diet, fatty fish, we want to try to get some omega-3 fatty acids in there. If you're vegan, lots of nuts and grains to be able to, again, get those omega-3s. There are supplements that you can take as well if they're not eating that. And a lot of college students are not eating the best. So sometimes supplementation, and this is actually a big passion of mine, to help people find that, a lifestyle that can lead to less inflammation overall, and through different diet choices and what they eat. And so that is something that I do offer consultations on. If anybody's interested, they can talk to me, and we can, talk about different probiotics they might want to try, different foods that can enhance that gut health, because the gut and the brain are so connected, and they help develop these neurotransmitters that once they get out of whack, it can lead to a whole slew of problems. So really starting with that gut health can really help boost their brain health as well as their mind health as well.
Awesome. Awesome. My goodness gracious. I'm so glad that you exposed that again and drove home that it's okay to allow them to fail. I'm so glad you drove and gave that example of your son. I know that that's going to be helpful for many. Awesome. So listen, any apps, any tools, anything along those lines to help out?
Absolutely. So, one of the things is we want to try to get our teenagers and young adults off the screens. However, I know that that's not very realistic. So knowing that they're constantly using them, let's utilize that, right? So as a professor, and as your child goes into college, a lot of times now, especially because of the pandemic, most professors have an online presence as well. So we use things called a learning management system. You're probably familiar with it from high school. But a lot of the colleges use programs like Canvas and Blackboard to upload all of our course materials, and encourage your child to really understand all the ins and outs of that technology. There are free downloadable apps for them, but there are, calendars and ways to sync it to your phone so that you're getting notified of when assignments are due. So when I make a comment or a change on an assignment that was submitted, or a reminder that an assignment is due, the students who are well prepared and already downloaded the app and did all those things, they're automatically getting notified. But other things to help increase your productivity and focus, which is what I find is the most challenging for most of my students, is that they don't have mommy or daddy telling them and reminding them of when things are due. And so the time management skills, this is something that is not necessarily taught in high school, but is essential to succeed in college. And so there's actually this cool app called Forest. So Forest app that it's a productivity and focus app. And you literally start building like a fake forest as you're more productive and focused. This little tree sprout turns into a big tree, and you can then actually purchase more trees and things like that end up actually being planted in real forests. So it ends up being like this virtual world that you're actually helping the environment. So that's a cool one to check out that might be helpful for people. But a lot of times people, they need, and I get this with a lot of my students, they have the best intentions. They've got their laptop out, they're taking notes during class, but then all of a sudden, they get a ping or a notification from a friend, or somebody posted something on social media. It's impossible to not look. It's like driving past a car wreck on the highway. Of course, you're going to turn and look. It's way more exciting than whatever thing that the instructor is telling them about, right? So there are apps that can help you. So Help Me Focus is one of them, as well as Freedom app. And they're downloadable. They'll literally mute all of your apps and all that background information and just shut it off. You set that designated time ahead of time. So say, okay, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, this is going to be my study time. I don't want to receive any incoming calls. I don't want, and you can set certain people that are allowed to get through, right? Make sure that your mom and dad can still get through, kind of things like that. But, turning off music, and, that you're not going to have any TikTok feeds, pop up or anything like that, can be really helpful. My Study List is a great student planner app as well, to help them keep their assignments and tests and exams all in line, to help them with that organization and time management. But then for focusing on their mind, I love apps like Calm and Headspace. I recommend this to people of all ages to help them with calming down at the end of the day, to really fueling their brain and mind support by getting good night's sleep and meditation practices and affirmations, because they can be working their tails off studying and trying to learn this material. But if they're not sleeping, they're not going to retain that information, right? And if they're way too stressed out and they have all this cortisol, they're not going to remember all that. So really fostering that mental health as well is so important. So there are, free versions of these apps, and there's paid versions. They're not expensive, but they can be really helpful. And then, of course, finding those human connections on campus. So through the counseling center, the career and counseling center on campus, your tuition is already included free counseling. So I always tell, for most colleges, at least the ones that I've taught at, it's included in tuition. And so I'm like, gosh, if I could get free therapy, I mean, I would be in there every single day. It's so easy, but they're there to help you plan your courses and your career and, help you with everyday struggles. And if they can't facilitate that support for you on campus, they have tons of resources to be able to send you elsewhere. And that is something I actually love doing, that not only at the college, but, I have consulting where I can help people navigate it and even reach out to counseling centers on the student's behalf and just set up that first initial appointment. Because sometimes that can be the hardest thing, that if they don't have that person to kind of do it and help them navigate their college website, and, they're confused about financial aid and they don't know how to do this and all of that, sometimes just having that one person to help them navigate it can be extremely helpful.
Awesome. Can we talk a little bit about that certification program? Just a little bit, if
Sure.
that's okay with you.
So I have my PhD in neuroscience, right? And so I'm a neuroscientist, but and as an educator, it's something that I'm very passionate about, teaching people about the brain. And I realized that there's a lot of people out there, wellness practitioners and life coaches and hypnotherapists and people with these advanced certifications that love helping and supporting other people, but they don't have necessarily a foundational knowledge about the brain. And when you're working with other people, sometimes they have these roadblocks, and understanding how the brain changes through neuroplasticity and through habits and motivation, and really understanding chemically what's going on and biologically what's going on is empowering them to better serve their clients. So that's how the certification program was created, with the intention. However, I'm noticing lots of teachers and parents and people from all walks of life are interested in this content and just understanding what's going on. And so it is open to anybody. It was originally created for those wellness providers, but really anybody can benefit from it. And at the end, the conclusion, you do have a certification from the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Neuroscience, showing that you have an advanced education in those fields and on those topics. And I do also have, as I mentioned, the individual consulting that I also offer for people from all walks of life who just really want to kind of pick a neuroscientist's brain and understand more about, some more personal topics that you might not want to post on social media and ask me a quick question, something like that, where we can go in more depth and have a more meaningful connection and conversation about that. So that's really what I created the Academy for. And the certification program is a fantastic way to get started, to learn more about the brain, to help yourself and help people around you.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I so appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious to know, for individuals who want to get in contact with you, and of course we'll tag and loop your social media in, but yes, if you can share, that'd be perfect.
Absolutely. So the best way to get in touch with me is on the Academy website. So that's academyofneuro.com. And you can reach out to me directly on the website. But you can also find me on social media. I am on everything. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter. I have accounts on all of them, and it's at Be Well with Dr. Hayley. And that's Hayley with 2 Y's. I'm sure it's going to the podcast notes, so you'll be able to see those links there. But then also a great resource that I would love to offer your listeners it's a ABC resource guide of commonly abused drugs. And as I teach an addiction course and a psychopharmacology course, and I get so many questions about various drugs and different street names versus, generic names versus, prescription names, and all of these different things. People just want to understand what these drugs are that are on the street that people might be using and abusing. And so I literally went through every single letter of the alphabet, and I selected one drug to represent each letter. It was actually really fun to put this together. But I call it the ABCs of commonly abused drugs. And it's a great resource, especially for parents of teenagers, to just kind of have in their back pocket. So if they start hearing their kids or hearing things on the news talking about different drugs and you've never heard that term before, you can kind of reach into this resource and learn just a little bit more about it. And of course, my contact information is on there as well. So you can grab that. It's completely free. It's at the Academy of Neuro, it's academyofneuro.com website. You'll be able to see that free resource on there and be able to stay in touch and be able to get on my email list. I send periodic little brain nuggets and neuroscience news and things like that every once in a while to some of my followers. So I would love to have you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. There were just so many takeaways, so many tips were tossed, and so many gems were dropped during this call that it was absolutely awesome. Everything from, of course, the repetition, of course, of the affirmations and the gratitude journal and eating right. That's so important. And then also this learning management system. I mean, it was so phenomenal. I just want to thank you, Dr. Hayley Nelson, for just spending this time with us today. I know that all of our listeners will want to see this recording again. They can totally go to Pointers for Parents podcast. And then, of course, they'll also see your connections in your social medias as well there. I'm so excited about it. And for our listeners, you know that next week, of course, we will have our life coach, tiaras, and lipsticks. Yep. Kamara will be with us on next week. And we're so glad that all of you all have listened today. Again, thank you so much. Again, Dr. Hayley Nelson, and we may have to have you back. I don't know, maybe in the next few months. I would love
that. Thank you so much. And people feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm a real person, I promise.
She is. She's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lloyd.
You're very welcome. Have a good day, everyone. Take care. Goodbye. Pointers for Parents podcast.